All right, today we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about performance management, managing performance reviews to be positive, inclusive, and growth minded. Why do CTOs care about this? Well, we have very expensive employees. Engineers aren't cheap. Making sure their employees are operating at peak performance is super important for anybody in the organization, but I would argue for the most expensive employees, it probably matters more. So let's get into performance management. We're going to go through the agenda first. We have to discuss why is an annual performance review important at all? Might sound like a stupid question. Some people hate them. Some people don't put effort into them. Some people, walk or sleep their way through them as best as they can, just survive to the next day. I actually want to hopefully compel you to think about annual performance reviews being an incredibly important part of the employee lifecycle, their career journey, and everything else that they're working on. We're going to talk about annual, weekly, and real time feedback. I don't think that performance reviews are the end all be all of getting feedback. If you're only giving feedback annually, you're doing it wrong. So the section will cover that. We're also going to talk about building self awareness, which is really the whole point of feedback. Getting as many points of view as you can about yourself and giving your employees as many points of view as they can about themselves is also super important. And it really unleashes and harnesses the potential that they have within themselves. We're also going to get into the stigma of the painful annual review process and how to transform into positive. So it's not just giving you tools and structure to do an annual performance review, but it's actually turning it into a positive experience that employees will actually look forward to after they experience one of these first positive performance reviews. We're going to be talking about streamlining feedback and the performance review process. And then there's some free tools that I'm going to be able to give you and hand out to you that you can use at your own company. Or you can maybe go to your leader of HR and see what they think about these tools. Use them, if you will. Have them inspire you to modify your own tools or continuously improve your process. All right, so let's get into why annual performance reviews are important. So I think first off, getting an understanding of what you do really well helps build confidence in yourself. A confident employee is just going to be that much more productive. You can think about your employees that are super engaged. It likely has to do with that they're confident with what they're doing. That's only a piece of the equation. Confidence is one thing, but similarly, you have to get an understanding of where you have room to grow, right? Building that self-awareness of areas that you don't quite have the mastery at to the things that you're confident on, give the employee a surface area to start emerging and growing into. So it also helps identify those areas that give opportunities to manifest that growth. So that's also super important as well, is really be thinking about what you're confident in and the areas that you have to grow, not just for yourself as a leader, but also for each and every one of your employees. And I think it's important that as a company, you want to build an environment where it's safe to think about career level growth, not just a place to do work. Let me first off talk about what career level growth means to me. Career level growth is, what am I going to be doing on my next job that I learned here? What kind of opportunities are going to open for my next job because of the work that I'm doing today? It's kind of a different span of time if you think about it, where again, most employees think about the job that I have to do to get this deliverable done next week, or my manager's thinking about giving me a promotion in 2 years, and that's just like the terminus of how far people are thinking. Where if you can create an environment where people are thinking about their entire career and you can actually talk to them about their entire career, what is in scope and the things that you'll discuss in your performance reviews, in the feedback that you give, is just going to be that much more rich. So we'll get a little bit more into career level growth coming up here in a bit, but just remember for now, the scope of how we think about our employees and how we think about ourselves should be at the career level, not the project level, not in my time here at whatever company that you're working at, but across and spanning their entire career. All right, so why an annual performance review process? Well, if you think about it, performance feedback should be given frequently through the year. Both positive and critical feedback should be given through the year as much as possible, as much as a relationship can sustain that level of feedback. If you turn your relationship into just 100% feedback, that gets a little too much, maybe unsustainable, maybe a little bit healthy. But using good judgment, you'll learn how to give critical feedback when your employee is willing to kind of raise their level of self-awareness in those areas of growth, and when it's important to give positive feedback. So feedback should be coming from your manager, maybe the CEO, maybe the CTO, maybe a senior director, whoever it may be. You should constantly be getting feedback from your manager as a leader. It helps you build your own self-awareness. In turn, your employees should be constantly getting feedback from you. And if they're not, there's something wrong. You should actually start building a culture where you give feedback to somebody and then you ask for feedback first to practice it. And it might just be positive feedback to start, and then you can actually start working on critical feedback. But if there's an environment that you're in that is completely devoid of feedback, you're doing it wrong. You also should be getting feedback from your peers. Your teammates often have an incredible perspective on you, maybe even more so than your manager. They're working with you day by day. You guys are shoulder to shoulder. It's really important for you to be seeking feedback from your peers and your teammates. Weekly one-on-ones, bi-weekly one-on-ones, monthly one-on-ones, quarterly one-on-ones. Use all those environments to actually get feedback from your team. Maybe it's after a project finishes. Get feedback. What did I do really well here? What could I have improved? This is all super great things to actually help you increase your self-awareness. So yeah, you should definitely be asking for feedback if you aren't getting it. And again, if you just start giving feedback, you'll start seeing that people will reciprocate. Someone's got to start. Someone's got to be the first mover. So again, if you're in a feedback environment where it's just devoid of any sort of feedback, you being the first person starting is often a way to start establishing that culture, and then keep moving in and more into that culture. Again, not to the point where it's unsustainable, but to the point where there's an adequate level of feedback being given frequently. So the annual process basically formalizes the feedback process. It is a way to write it down, put it in black and white, maybe file it in a system or a file cabinet or wherever your feedback reviews go. But yeah, your normal feedback process probably will be seen as having some gaps. And the reason for that is if you're in a situation where you give an annual performance review, or if you get an annual performance review and there's a surprise there, let's say your manager or you go up to an employee and say something and they're like, gosh, I wish I would have had this feedback 6 months ago. That's a detection of a gap in your normal feedback process. And that actually gives you an opportunity to learn where you need to give more feedback. So think about a performance review as, yes, it's a formalized version of feedback, but it's also a backstop for any feedback that hasn't been given in that year to actually have a chance to give that feedback. But again, that's also a problem. If there's a gap between when feedback could have been given a little closer to the time that the behavior was observed, positive or negative, then you actually want to shorten that. And so this is a great way to detect those areas where your feedback process is broken. All right, so we've talked about feedback a lot. Why is it important? Feedback provides you with a perspective that's different than your own. Just hands down, that's ultimately what this comes down to. I have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 brain, 1 mouth. Got my fingers. I can observe the world through my 5 senses, but it's still only 1 body. Now, if you think about 12 people doing something or 2,000 people doing something, we know that people can do more in numbers. Building self-awareness is exactly the same way. So widening the amount of sensation, the amount of perspectives, the amount of diverse experiences, the amount of people looking at you really just allows you to leverage more bodies and more brains into actually getting as much perspective on yourself as possible, or in this case, providing perspective for your employees. And remember too, all feedback is a gift. Even critical feedback, maybe especially critical feedback, is very much a gift. So appreciate the time and courage to those that give it. Again, especially for critical feedback. All right, let's get into building self-awareness a little bit more. Most people have low to medium self-awareness. I've just had that observation working. There's some people I've met that have incredibly high self-awareness. And when you meet a person like that, you'll know why I kind of rate people as having mainly low to medium self-awareness. Operating with the highest level of self-awareness gives you the best perspectives to make decisions. The more you know about yourself, the more you know about your growth areas, and the more you know about your strengths, just gives you that much more of a perspective to make better decisions. And as a leader, you're required to make good decisions all day long. Occasionally, you make bad decisions. You should be self aware of those. Have that be something you internalize and then get better the next time you make a decision like that. So, yeah, and this also helps drive employment and career outcomes. The more self awareness you have, the higher level roles you're going to get, the more impactful roles you're going to be able to get because people are going to recognize that you're a better decision maker because you have that self awareness. So you should go to work every day with the goal to increase your own self awareness. You as a leader need that. Your employees also need that. And building self awareness starts with the ability to take critical feedback, right? It just, you need to be able to take critical feedback. If you have a manager who only gives you positive feedback, you're not getting the self awareness you need. If you have a peer that's only giving you positive feedback, you're not getting the self awareness you need. Everyone has places where you can get critical feedback, and you need to harness into that to become as self aware as you can. I also mentioned on this slide something called vocally self critical. Vocally self critical basically is proactively, out loud, giving yourself critical feedback in front of others. For instance, I've stumbled my words a few times in this. I wish I could have been perfect. I wish I could have gotten all the words right. I reached for words a couple times. I'm just new at this and I want to get better. That's my goal. But I'm not the best at giving presentations like this on YouTube. I'm going to get better at it. I'm going to try. I appreciate all your feedback in the comments too. See, by me being vocally self critical, I actually opened the door for you, maybe, to want to go into the comment section and leave me a little critical feedback. I would appreciate that you would. But the reason that you might feel more compelled to do that, if you weren't already compelled to do that, is because I took a moment to be vocally self critical of myself. That shows that I have self awareness, but it also invites me to to get more self awareness through other feedback from people that are watching this. So let's talk about the stigma of the annual performance review. This is where I think most people, most corporations are at. Usually it's because the annual performance review process is terribly designed. It's incredibly time consuming, very time consuming. Actually, let me give you an example. At Amazon, I believe they call the OLR process. It was 2 weeks, usually it took. I mean, the roadmap stopped. Like all work stopped at Amazon for this period of time. Teams basically just sat there and they wrote documents and they filled out forms. And it was soul crushingly hard. And you were still expected to keep Amazon online. You were still expected to do all this other type of stuff. But making like forward progress in Amazon's interest became impossible because it was such a heavy weight process. And people there were there at the time know what I'm talking about. So we need to find a new way to do that. Amazon also did that. Amazon did an A/B test for a period of time. They came up with a super streamlined process, something that took literally minutes to do. And they looked at the outcomes. One organization did this new streamlined process. The other organizations did this old heavyweight OLR process. They looked at the outcomes. They defined the outcomes like employee retention, the promotion rate, all sorts of other kind of HR metrics. And they recognized that the streamlined process not only led to greater employee satisfaction, but it actually led to better outcomes. And so in recent years, I'd say within the last 5 years, Amazon has switched everyone over to the streamlined process, basically making it more enjoyable, better, and again, to better outcomes. But in the worst case scenario for some of these performance reviews, maybe at your corporation, performance reviews can turn into a punitive process. You will read your performance review. Maybe the managers are, required to give a certain amount of critical feedback. Maybe it's not well given. Maybe it's without a lot of understanding. Maybe it's without a lot of data points. So maybe a manager you don't work with frequently has to write this very in-depth performance review, but they don't have a lot of data to work with, which means that not only is it punitive, but it's punitive in a world that you don't even see yourself in. And that can help you lose confidence in yourself. It can help you lose confidence in your company, and it could help basically lose employees, and that's no good for anybody. And experiencing these type of bad performance review processes can create trauma, which can last for years. So if you actually do take some of this advice in this presentation and apply it and look for a more streamlined process, again, I'll show you those free tools here in a little while. It might take 1 or 2 rounds of going through a better performance review process to basically erase some of that trauma that's taken place in some of these old, really bad performance review processes. So again, a well-designed performance review process can give employees confidence. It could be an input into growth, and it could increase trust in the organization. I think those are all very fine goals to have. All right, so we're going to kind of get into what I've arrived, and this is also sourcing from a lot of my experience at Amazon, is what I consider a very delightful performance review process. So first off, I think some performance reviews at some companies are entirely tied to a certain job discipline. And I think that's fine. I think there's a lot of room to have a performance review tied to a certain job discipline. The job description, the dimensions of that role, the competencies that you intend to measure, those are good. My recommendation and the way Amazon has done it is it's centered on the core values and leadership principles. It gives everyone a common language to actually use during the performance review process. And as we get into a little bit more of the talent review or the talent calibration process, if you're doing it just by the job family dimensions or the job family kind of competencies, you're not going to have a shared language. So moving to core values and leadership principles, I think, is important. So yeah, feel free to work off the job specific criteria, the capabilities, all the core things of that role, but it should be narrated from a company perspective, company values perspective. This streamlined process that I'm about to show you, basically you do your self-review in 10 to 15 minutes. It doesn't take a day, it doesn't take 2 days. It's something that you can do very, very quickly. Oftentimes it goes faster than that 10 to 15 minutes, but if you actually take your time, it'll be about 10 to 15 minutes max. Managers, about 10 to 15 minutes per direct. So if you have 8 employees, you're looking at 80 to about 100 minutes total. Less than 2 hours, you can finish your entire performance review, feedback giving to your directs. But this process also opens to peer review. So every peer that you ask or they ask you should also take about 10 to 15 minutes per peer. So in total, you're looking at 3 to 4 hours for an individual contributor for their entire annual performance review process. Total time for a manager, 10 to 12 hours. That's a day and a half compared to the 2 weeks, 3 weeks that I've heard at some companies. It does include getting your anonymized 360-degree feedback, which will feed into your growth plan, a later topic for me, and a 1-hour assessment review with your manager. And that tallies up to pretty much no time at all. All right, moving on. Let's get into the demo for the free tools. Demo starts now. Yeah, we're going to go through the self-assessment, the peer review, manager review, how to anonymize the 360 feedback, the histogram, and then what actually should be going on in the review meeting. Let's start the demo now. All right, let's get into these free tools. You can download these in the description. Just make a copy off of my Google Doc, and you can modify and use these on your own. Again, get them into your existing process or slightly modify for whatever reason you need. This is the employee performance review. This is what we're going to be working towards. So this is a template. I just pulled some, basic company values. Again, we're going to be anchoring our entire performance review on company values. In this case, we have customer obsession, raise the bar, learn and be curious, ownership, invent and simplify, disagree and commit, bias for action, and delivers results. It's not the whole set of Amazon, but just kind of showing you your 5 or your 8 or your 9 leadership values for your company. You can plug in here. And the histogram basically is going to show where a peer rated you as a strength or where a peer rated you as a growth area. It's also going to show where you as a manager or your manager, in the case of you receiving one of these histograms, showed that you have a strength or a growth area. You're also going to see yourself indicated on here for what you self-review as your strength and growth area, and growth area as well. And then there's going to be a lot of room in here for written text that helps back these up. This would be largely anonymized. The only 2 individuals that are revealed in the performance review process are your manager, or if you're giving this to an employee, that would be you, as well as the employee self-review. Those will actually be de-anonymized to show that feedback, because it's a trusting relationship between you and your direct employee or your manager and yourself. Everything else that would be added here would be anonymized from the feedback forms. So let's see what one of these feedback forms looks like. Remember, we're going to be utilizing this feedback form for uh, the self review, for the manager review, and for peer reviews. So the way this works as a manager is you would go in, basically create a copy. This one says template up here. You create a copy for it. So employee 360-degree feedback for John Smith or Sarah Jones or whoever else like that. Each employee gets a created form for themselves. And what you do is you send that form out to all the feedback givers. In your case, as a manager, you would send out to the employee and all their peers. And if there's other people they work collaboratively across the organization with that you think have a good perspective, a good objective perspective of that employee, you'd want to send that to them as well. And then you'd want to set an expectation that, this is a process that is compulsory or, heavily encouraged, however you want to put it. The goal is, by whatever means, to collect as much feedback as possible in one of these forms. And this form is dead simple. It is literally 10 to 15 minutes per time you have to fill this out. So an employee will fill it out for themselves, 10 to 15 minutes. A manager will fill it out, 10 to 15 minutes. Peers will fill it out, 10 to 15 minutes. In aggregate, like we said earlier, an hour and a half for your average employee, a day and a half for an average manager to complete these processes. So you can see here that we have the email automatically being recorded as a part of the Google form. I also have the Google form set up so that it limits to one response so that we're not getting flooded with people doing multiple responses. Here's another way, just if you have an employee ID, you can type that in. Maybe it's your email address, maybe it's something else. And then the person you're leaving feedback for, their name should also be up here where it says template, but here's just another way to make sure the employee that's filling out this feedback is being deliberate in filling out for this person just by typing it out. So we're going to choose 3 of the company values to weigh in on here. Why 3? Well, it drives a selection process that should be hard. Maybe someone just stands out at you as being really good in this one area, but by being pressed to do 3, you're going to actually have to kind of look a little bit more holistically at the person. Or let's say this person demonstrates a lot of your company's core principles or leadership values. You're going to have to be a little selective about the ones you choose, just the ones that exemplify where they do their best. What are their strengths? What are their superpowers? And it's fun. All you do is you click, and let's say it's these 3. You're done. You move on to the next. Then there's a question that says, why did you choose these 3 areas for this employee as strengths or superpowers? Use 60 words or less. Critical here that you're not writing a novel. You're not writing 3 paragraphs. You're writing 60 words or less of why you chose these areas. Then they move on. Then we're going to ask the employee to fill out 2 of the company values that are their growth areas. Why 2 instead of 3? 1, because it's harder for people to give critical feedback, and people usually struggle here, and we want to make this a streamlined, expedited process. 2, as you saw in the histogram, there's usually more positive feedback than there's critical feedback. From a human psyche perspective, that's more palatable than getting equal amounts of critical feedback and positive feedback. And I think just as a general rule, as you think about giving your own feedback, it's important to realize that slightly more positive feedback usually candy coats the critical feedback as well. I don't necessarily need that as a leader now. I actually just really appreciate the critical feedback. I dive right into that. I want that. That's also Amazon training. But generally the equation here is 3 pieces of positive feedback, 2 pieces of critical feedback. So you'll choose 2 here. Again, we're going to do 60 words or less on why did you choose these 2 areas as growth areas for this employee. Use 60 words or less. Again, not writing novels, not spending hours, literally just spending a couple of minutes putting together just some general thoughts supporting your decision of why you chose those 2 areas. This is where you can get into a little bit more domain specific or competencies specific, but we're not also opening a novel here. We want this about 60 words or less. When this employee is doing their best, they're doing fill in the blank. And the last question is, when this employee shows they have room for growth, they're doing, and this could be an area where they exhibit certain behaviors or lack of competency in certain on specific skills. This is where peers and managers and self-employees can reflect what they think their growth areas are. That's the whole form. It is just a few pieces of information, multiple choice, 60 words, multiple choice, 60 words, 60 words, 60 words, and you hit done. And what happens is when you're actually aggregating this into the responses section, you'll get all these responses. You'll see 8, 9, 10 pieces of feedback that was left for this employee. And if you click link to sheets, it will actually export all this information into a spreadsheet that makes it very easy to copy into the histogram. So let's go back to the histogram. We already showed how you collect information. So each one of these would be some responses on the form. So what you do to basically, create this is you would remove all of this, you would remove all of this, and all I do is read each response, and I'll go over here and I'll add, let's say here's some positive peer feedback. I just copy and paste that cell that says a peer left that feedback, and off we go. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Very simple form: aggregate, collect information, take that information, export it to Google Sheets, take that Google Sheet, and then start populating the histogram for the 60 words or less, written kind of commentary. You copy these in here into the reasonings why this person chose this as a strength, why this person chose this as a growth area, and then when I'm at my best or where I can grow my capabilities. You copy in the anonymized feedback and you fully anonymize it. You don't say who it's from, again, unless it's from the employee or the manager themselves. Those two should be de-anonymized. Yeah, and this is essentially what the employee will read. This is the whole employee performance review. A lot of 60 words or less, the histogram. Now, let's say you've gone through this, you've built out histograms for all your employees, and it's time to do the performance review. First thing I'll say is don't schedule a performance review during your regular one-on-one time. One-on-ones should be structured environments. I'll have a talk about that, how to have great one-on-ones with your employees. But don't displace a one-on-one with a performance review. Set up separate time. I usually set an hour, 45 minutes at the minimum to go through the performance review. I usually send this histogram or this document out to the employee an hour or two ahead of the performance review time, so they have time to read through and show up prepared. Hopefully you as the manager have already read through this and you're familiar with the subject, you're familiar with the nuances, and you can show up ready to have the conversation. The employee usually shows up pretty interested in this part. Now remember, down here there's going to be a lot of written feedback, but it's going to be essentially a wall of text. A lot of great detail in there, a lot of really good information in there, but the analysis really comes up here. This is the tool that I think is most useful and the employee usually enjoys the most. What's interesting about this is that you're going to start seeing these areas where you get more density in feedback, either on the strength side. As you can see, this employee ownership was rated really, really high. Invent and simplify was rated a little on the lower side, area for growth or bias for action, maybe a little more area for growth. But there's actually really cool nuance. As a manager, I actually like giving the employee feedback on based off of my analysis. They'll do their own analysis, and then you could use the rest of that conversation to basically look for what additional self-awareness can we build about ourselves here. I like looking for hidden strengths and blind spots. Let me define that briefly. So a hidden strength is when peers and a manager, let's say, rate an employee very highly. In this case, the employee was rated very high on ownership by peer and manager. But notice how they didn't rate themselves high. They instead chose customer obsession, raised the bar, and delivers results, but not ownership. This is kind of a hidden strength, right? They may not have the self-awareness that a lot of people look at this person and say, wow, that is an incredible amount of ownership. You can actually see it's so strong here. I actually had add an extra column just to get this employee filled out all the way here. And no one said it was a growth area. But because the employee didn't recognize this as themselves, as one of their superpowers or one of their strengths, it's a hidden strength. It's an area where you can help them build confidence. In reverse, there's something called the blind spot, where you have a lot of peers have given feedback that this is an area where the employee can grow. The manager also agrees this is an area where they can grow, but they didn't rate themselves to this being a growth area. There could be a blind spot. Maybe they don't understand they're a little weaker in this area, and you can look for opportunities for growth here as well. So I always look for hidden strengths and blind spots. Not all employees have them. Some employees are a little bit more uniform, or they have great self-awareness. In this case, this employee didn't have great self-awareness. So finding those hidden strengths and blind spots for them will feed into that growth plan and feed into the opportunities and the coaching that I'll want to give them. In some cases, you'll get this a little erratic, where you have some employees saying bias for action is really, really, really strong. Some other peers say it's really, a growth area. As itself, it was a growth area, as a bias for action. So what's going on there? Why does the manager see it as a growth area? Why does the employee see it as a growth area? And why do roughly half of this person's peers see this as a growth area, where the other half see it as strengths? And this could be due to maybe people not being very well calibrated on your company's core values. It could be that this employee's exposed in certain areas where it seems like this person's doing really, really well and having great bias for action, but to other people that might work more closely, or opposite of that. So there's some nuance here you can dig into, and then you can source from the feedback below to kind of see what might be going on here. So I always try to annotate this with a little analysis to drive the conversation in the performance review. But you can also see this as confidence building in some ways, where, like for Raise the Bar, you can see, hey, this is a growth area both me and my manager agree with. This is what this employee would say. But there's a couple people that might not see that as an area where they're doing well. Let's dig into that. Why do you think that is? And you're not trying to de-anonymize the people. You're not trying to say, oh, I wonder who gave me that as a growth area where everyone else thinks I'm great. You're driving the question of, why do a subset of your peers think that this is a growth area for you? Why another subset, a greater subset of your peers, think this is a strength? That's a really interesting way to spend those 45 minutes to an hour. Another way you can look at this is another one that can help build confidence, delivers results, really, really strong from the employee, strong from the employee as themselves, and from peers. So this is an area to say, gosh, I'm doing really good. I'm delivering results. Helps build that confidence. Where over here on Invent and Simplify, where the manager and the peers came over here, it's like, wow, this is an area where we probably want to sit down and actually have a lot more discussions through the next sets of one-on-ones, through the growth plan, which we'll get to in a later presentation. So all in all, this should be a very rich conversation that is very data-driven. And that's what's wonderful, I really think, about this whole framework is with the anonymous feedback, 360 feedback, the employee is going to be getting a ton of perspective, new perspective, hopefully, about themselves. They're going to see some quantitative information and some qualitative information. So whichever way drives their brain, hopefully it's both, but maybe some people like the quantitative more, some people like the qualitative more. It's all going to be here no matter the type of employee. That will also help drive that conversation. What this will feed into is the growth plan. And again, we're going to get to that in a later presentation, how to take these insights and turn them into action. But that's it. That is the total employee performance review, annual performance review process. It's really just this form. You make a copy of it, you send it out to all the feedback givers, you collect the information, you build the histogram, you do some light analysis, you de-anonymize or you anonymize the feedback, you de-anonymize the manager and employee feedback so they can see that clearly, and that should stand out in the performance review. And then you're going to give them an overall rating. Again, we're going to get into overall ratings at a later presentation as well. Hope you enjoyed the demo. All right, so you've seen the demo. Hope you guys enjoyed the tools, and you guys can go download those. Just make a copy of it off of Google Drive. And you can take that to your HR person, or if you work at a startup, maybe you can actually use these tools as is, modify them as you see fit, or again, maybe use them as inspiration to add to your current process. I did want to kind of give some bonus content here, though, and some tips for giving feedback. One thing that we are trained on, or were trained on a lot at Amazon, was about biases. Biases are something that we all live with. If you think you don't have biases, you're biased against yourself. But yeah, there's all sorts of biases. There's halo bias, horn bias, recency bias, affinity bias, authority bias. I'll define a couple of these, but I'll leave a link here and you can download these slides, click on this link, and it'll give you a whole set of tools for this. But halo bias is basically if you've had a wonderful experience with someone, let's say 3 months ago, that might cloud your judgment. A halo will be around them and everything they do will be seen through that lens. When there's actually an opportunity to see someone more critically, that halo gets in the way of that. And so being able to understand that you have this unconscious bias about this person who did something really great for you, and actually try to move from that subjective bias into a more objective look at them will only help serve them better when you're giving them feedback. The opposite of that is horn bias. If someone hurt you or if someone upset you, let's say within the last 3 months or a year, you might just think that person's a jerk. You're not going to be able to take an objective look at them the same way that you would if you recognized you had that bias and then you tried to look at this person more objectively without that bias there. Recency bias. Maybe someone did something bad to you or nice for you, or you noticed a behavior, and then you just anchor the behavior on that something that just happened 2 weeks ago as you're trying to assess someone for the entire year. Understanding that you might have a recency bias, set that recency bias aside. That's very subjective. Look more objectively at the person their whole year. And hopefully, if you don't detect your recency bias, maybe a peer will as we get into the talent calibration function. Affinity bias. If you share things in common with someone, if you guys both like comics, or if you both like a certain type of movies, or if you like a certain type of adult beverage and maybe happy hour, whatever it may be, you guys are both foodies. Having an affinity bias for someone also can prevent you from looking at someone objectively and providing quality, positive, and critical feedback. Authority bias. Yeah, this is something, when you, especially when you give your manager a performance review or give them any feedback. Authority can be a scary thing. You might just be like, I can't tell this to this person because they have authority over me. Again, that is not objectively looking at that person. You're seeing them through the lens of their authority. And that does not serve that person if you can't give them objective feedback. They will only be seen as the authority figure, not only from you, but as themselves. And that does nobody any good. The performance feedback is going to be incredibly limited for your manager if you do that. So yeah, give critical feedback. This is the other thing. As you saw, the demo is designed so that you kind of are forced, or at least heavily compelled, into giving critical feedback. You can't just give positive feedback. And the reason for that is that you can't just have one-sided feedback. Everyone's got strengths. Everyone's got areas of growth, right? To build self-awareness, if that's what we're after, having that 360-degree feedback on the good side and on the growth side is super important. And this is hard. This is hard for people, especially people that are new in their careers. They might not know how to give critical feedback. They might not know if an employee is in a growth area or not. They might not even know how to identify that. And so I think, especially for newer employees, encouraging them to practice critical feedback with yourself or with a peer can help them build this muscle that just, I don't think naturally is in a lot of people. Coming from Amazon, I definitely learned a lot about critical feedback. I learned more about critical feedback because it was a part of that culture. It helped grow me faster. I built more self-awareness there in the 8 years that I was there than anywhere else, largely because of that critical feedback. So maybe your culture isn't as into critical feedback as, let's say, Amazon was or is. But that doesn't mean that it's not the right time to start building that muscle if your organization is bad at it, if you're bad at it, or if, like, especially your junior level employees are bad at it. But definitely help find those blind spots. I was given a lot of blind spots when I joined Amazon that I never knew were there. Or if I knew they were there, I didn't know how to articulate it. Or if I knew they were there, it was only subconscious. Getting those blind spots out so that people have directional areas to grow in can be very, very potent. Again, with this, as you saw in the demo, do it quick. Do not overthink the feedback. Accept to challenge your own biases. I think people get into paralysis analysis, and oftentimes the original thought you had is usually the correct one when you're thinking about someone, minus the own biases. And Amazon's process showed that. They actually encourage people to not dwell, not to second guess, not to re-edit and edit again and edit again after that. And understand also, on the receiving side, this feedback was given quickly, right? You know that the other person said, this is what I think about the situation. This is what I think about this person. This is what I think their growth areas are. Here's just a couple of words on why. The feedback giver knows that it was done in reaction to that prompt. So try to honor that. It works really, really well. Tips for self-reviews. Again, you're going to be asked to give yourself critical feedback. Be vocally self-critical. It's very potent. I did not realize this before joining Amazon, how powerful it is to be vocally self-critical. I was always in admiration of Jeff Bezos and those that they trained to see how vocally self-critical they were. quite frequently. And that opened the door for them not only to gain some credibility as a leader, which is super powerful when you're vocally self-critical. If you've never tried it, try it. It's amazing. But also, again, inviting more feedback so that they have more data points, so that they have more areas where they know that they can grow. And that self-critical awareness is just an important skill set to build for the rest of your career. Starting now, starting tomorrow, continuing practicing it can be, again, very potent to your career. All right, so let's get into the manager review and the growth plan. We're going to get into growth plans in another presentation. I'm going to spend a lot of time and I have some free tools for that as well. But you saw the histogram in the demo. You're going to be getting anonymized feedback. They will look at those blind spots, those growth areas. Hopefully, you'll get interesting pieces of anonymized 360 feedback. You'll want to take that and turn that into a smart plan. Again, we're going to be going more into growth plans. I'll be giving some free demos and some free tools on that. But as an output from a performance review, hopefully you found some gaps in your skills, some areas where you can grow. Having that self-awareness certainly is potent and it certainly is important, but turning that into an actionable plan is something we're going to be spending a lot of time on in one of our follow presentations. But just know that it's not the self-awareness is the only outcome that's potent here, but it's actually building an actionable plan. Typical calendar for annual reviews. This is just an example of what I've used at past companies. I've seen it kind of work this way at Amazon. This is a little bit more genericized. I recommend starting in February. Remember, you're looking at the employee's past year, so kind of getting within that cliff of that year is good. January is usually no good because people are just coming back from vacation. They're still getting their momentum back. So starting in February is about as early in the year as I'd recommend. Waiting until May seems a little too far, like last year's distant memory. So February seems to be a timely time to start. And then basically, here's a week-by-week guideline. Week one, you go through manager training, you go through employee training. Hopefully, your company has some tools to be, for training for performance reviews. If you're borrowing this or implementing this as is, you'll kind of want to go through these slides and talk them through. Make sure that all managers are on board for how this works. Get your employees on board for how this works, especially employees that have had some PTSD or some trauma from past performance reviews. Maybe getting them to have a more open mind could be a very interesting outcome for that type of training. Weeks 2 and 3 all are about collecting feedback. Managers, if you use this system, you'll create copies of the templates of the form that I showed you. The forms are created by the managers as peers, as the employee themselves, and as you fill out the form, it will start collecting in those responses, and that will be the basis of how you build the histogram later on, as you saw in the demo. And then week 4 is anonymized feedback and histogram. So now that you have all the data, you can go easily construct one of those histograms just by copying and pasting. Does not take long. It took me about 20 minutes the last time I went through this with these exact set of tools. Week 5, and we'll get a little bit more into this as well at a future presentation, but the employee talent review / calibration process should be happening roughly about week 5. And that's where you, in front of your peers and in front of your manager, establish the overall rating for that employee for the year. So where this talk has been focused on collecting and aggregating feedback, the next talk will be about the performance rating and also growth plans is coming out. By week 6 or 7, so if you start in February, you'd be kind of looking somewhere around early March here, early April here, where you present the 360-degree feedback, the overall performance rating to employees. Hopefully the employee has a ton of new self-awareness. They've maybe found some hidden strengths. They found some blind spots. But week 8 plus, we're going to kind of go into that growth planning. Again, the topic for a future presentation. Well, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope you enjoyed the tools. I hope you learned a thing or two. If there's 2 or 3 takeaways that I'd give for this, performance reviews shouldn't be scary. Feedback should be frequent and not just held on an annual basis. And building self-awareness and being vocally self-critical are very potent tools. If you take those things away and you start applying those in your everyday work, I think you're going to be much more performant, have much better potential, and are going to get promoted faster. Thank you for listening. Bye.